there are two things about privilege. One is its existence, and the other is what it does. The existence of privilege is the outcome of thousands of years of patriarchy. It takes different forms at different times in different societies and different periods. So, in India, it takes the form of caste. In the US, it takes the form of race. There are many different ways that it will show up. And there is a common denominator to all of them, and that common denominator is the separation of people in terms of access to resources. Some people have more, some people have less. And more or less without any logic that connects it to needs. In other words, if I have 10 children to feed and you have no one to feed except yourself, it makes sense to me that I would have more access to resources than you. That isn't generally how it goes. In fact, generally speaking, if I have 10 children to feed, I'm going to have less access to resources than the person who doesn't, because there are many reasons for why that is. So there is that separation that is built into the existence of privilege. And then the second thing that happens is that privilege has to be justified. Because all of us, and this is where it comes back, and I think it kind of like will cycle again and again to this sense that what we think about who we are as humans has everything to do with how we're going to respond to crisis, how we're going to respond to anything. So my personal faith is that all of us are born with a certain amount of care, that our souls care and want everyone's needs to be attended to. So when we look at a world in which resources are divided in ways that don't make sense, we need to come up with a theory that explains why. That theory is what has led to this idea that people deserve what they have. So that's the second layer of privilege, is that both the people with more access and the people with less access are trained to believe that this uneven, illogical distribution of resources that is not related to needs, that it actually makes sense, that it has reasons, that if I have more, it says something about me. Either, there are various and sundry theories. The one that is prevalent now in much of the world is this idea of merit. I worked hard, I went to school, all of these things make me superior to somebody else. It is that piece that makes it hard to have the imagination. It's not just the fact of having different access to resources. It's that I somehow think, consciously or unconsciously, fully or partially, that there is such a thing as those people. And as soon as there's those people, whether they have more or less than me, they are those people. It's hard for me to imagine their existence. It's hard for me to imagine the narrative of their life. This is the place where we connect, is when we are able to understand each other's narratives. Because our experience isn't just the events, it's the narrative, it's the constant narrative that we tell ourselves about what is happening. So it's possible to train the imagination. It's possible, and I find it absolutely rich and delicious. I have stepped into the shoes of people such as George W. Bush, a veteran just coming back from war, angry with other people that they are against the war. someone who molested an 8-year-old girl, someone who stole money and all the connections from his wife and left her bereft without any meaning or sustainability. So I've stepped into the shoes of many people that are completely foreign to who I am and how I think and how I operate. And every time that I do that, I find my world expanding. So I would say to imagine the lives of people who are now really suffering, who are really lacking privilege. And they are, you can think of different categories of people because the situation right now is affecting people differentially based on their social location. If you live in the global south, it is much more scary to be an old person than if you live in the global north. Sure, the disease, takes the lives of older people more than the lives of younger people. But even with that, if you're in different places, if you're in a different class, if you know or don't know the language of the country where you live in, all of these things, it literally will change your life chances. I don't know the exact number, but in the United States, Black people are dying at twice the rate of white people from the COVID disease. That tells you something. That tells you something that is systemic. It doesn't tell you anything about those individuals, but you can imagine the fear that comes with that. You can imagine the consequences. You can imagine the need to mobilize in different ways. So it's an exercise in imagination.